life wasn't what we in the United Kingdom would consider a good way of life, especially for the underprivileged people, people with what the South Africans called racialistic people. It was difficult for me because as a young lad, my parents brought me up to believe everything about people was equal and opposite, and there's nothing strange about anybody else except the people you in your shoes. And my aunt had a farm in northern Natal, and I actually had a very, very bad dose of double pneumonia when I was a youngster, under 10 years old, and she sent me up to my aunt in northern Natal to recuperate. And up there I met a young black lad, Sipo, I'll never forget him. He became a really, really good friend of mine. And we went hunting together, and back in South Africa in those days, my aunt, I was under 10 years old, and we were given a 10-ball shotgun to go out and shoot bushbuck. Now this is not nonsense, it's absolutely true. And Sipo and I went out, I had the gun, he was the guide, because he knew the area that well. And he said, Nancy Kosam, Nancy Nkoko, which is a bushbuck. And I shot this thing, and I couldn't believe I'd actually shot it. And we came home with a nkonka, which is a bushbuck, and it was a male nkonka. And my aunt was she was just over the moon. She said, Irvin, who was my cousin, who, he lived there and he did all the shooting himself. He wasn't you don't shoot doe. The doe or the reproducers. You just shoot nkonka, which is a bushbuck, a male species. And I was a hero. I'd shot this bushbuck. It was a male bushbuck. And we ate it. We had that for dinner. It was brilliant, yeah. Well, not that night, but a few weeks later. And that's and Sipo and I, he is exactly the same age as me, within a few days. And 10 years later he had a really, really bad tractor accident, and he had one of his legs were amputated. And I tried to get him over to England in the early 90s, mid-90s. I said, Sipo, come over, come and see me. But he was just afraid of flying. He wouldn't do it. But that is my experience. And when I went home, to my home on the bluff in Durban, I said to Mum, how come Sipo can't come to visit me in his holidays? And she said, look, this is apartheid here. He's not allowed. And it's one of those things that is embedded in my memory as a young man, a young boy then. Yes, I did. Unofficially, but yes, I did. I was a member of the Hillcrest Villagers Gungadin team. Gungadin being the Comrades marathon team. So the first 4 runners in the race won the aggregate time of those people. And we were given a trip to run the London to Brighton road race, which is a similar distance, 56 miles. But when we arrived here, we entered from outside of the UK. When we arrived, the chairman, the racing secretary, Ian Champion, said we were welcome, and he gave us numbers, albeit the numbers were unofficial. And we ran it because of the Glen Eagles agreement. We were precluded from running road races outside of Southern Africa. Anyway, we ran the race and we won the team trophy by a fair margin. But we weren't given the team prize because we were unofficial runners. And because of Ian Champion's he was a fantastic guy. He wasn't into politics. All he was interested in doing was promoting the London to Brighton road race. And not being trying to be pompous, but we were the best ultra distance runners in the world. It was just a given fact. We were just the best. And he wanted the best to run his race. And he said, guys, come over here, run our race. We want the best ultra marathoners to run our race. And we did. We took the first five places in the race. So which you know, it's obvious that we were the best. And for that reason, I mean, we held a great respect for him, because he was doing it not just for politics, but for road running. He loved the race, he loved road running. He was a London Marathon runner himself. He wanted to come out and run Comrades Marathon. And we said, Ian, come out. We'll look after you. He in fact lived in my home when he came out. He lived with Joan and myself in Hillcrest, and he ran the Comrades. And he finished in a really, really good time. So, good memories. Not as many as I would like to have had. Graham Fraser was my closest running mate. I mean, he and I were joined at the hip, to be honest. We ran out. And we were almost like husband and wife, because if I did something that he didn't like, he'd have a go at me, and vice versa. And I'd go out training, and he'd say, I saw you the other day, you bastard, you were running. You didn't tell me you were training. But that's how it was with us. But we were both talented athletes, and I think, if the truth be told, Graham was more talented than I was. I sit now and say, he was just a great athlete, but he didn't realise he was that good. It took, and if I can say this, it took me to make him believe that he could do it. Because once he saw that I could do it, he realised, hello, you know, I think I can do this as well. And I was the first one to get a gold medal. At the end of the day, I got 4 gold medals, and he's got 6. Okay. His were outside of the top 5, mine were all inside the top 5. But it doesn't matter, he was just that good an athlete. He just needed somebody to make him believe he could run that well, and he did. Okay, the Comrades Marathon was inaugurated in 1921, and it was just after the Great War. And the inauguration of this marathon happened because there was a dispute between the Durban mayor and the Pietermaritzburg mayor. There was some dispute, I don't know what it was, but the guys that came back from this war decided to take a scroll, a message from the Durban mayor to the Pietermaritzburg mayor to establish the problems or discuss the problems. And they ran on foot from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, 56 miles, on dirt roads in those days. They didn't have tarmac in those days, to deliver the message from one mayor to the other. And that captured the imagination of the public, and you know, it was on the newspapers and what have you. There was no TV, of course, but it was on the newspapers, and it captured the imagination of the public, and this became an annual event. So the one mayor had to be pissed off with the other mayor for them to communicate with people on foot. And this happened year after year. And the one would come down, the next year it'd go up, then it'd go down. And so it happened. 1 year was up, 1 year was down. And that's how the marathon actually started. And it's been that way since 1921. And we are talking about nearly 100 years now. And it's the biggest ultramarathon, the most famous ultramarathon in the world. There's no question of that. There are people trying to bring in other ones, but there's no other marathon like it. The only time it stopped was between in the Second World War, between 1939 and 1945. It didn't run, but after that it just regurgitated. And from 19 runners in 1921, there were 19 runners, and I've lost count now. But when I last ran Comrades, it was in the very region of 8,000 or 9,000 runners running this crazy 56 miles. And I know now, in 2012, there are probably more like 15,000 athletes running the Comrades Marathon. When you think about the London Marathon, which attracts 30,000 athletes, but it's half the distance. This is twice the distance. And for Comrades Marathon, you need to qualify to run this race. You cannot just run a marathon. You have to run a marathon in under 4.5 hours. Otherwise you don't qualify. So you've got to, in the context of marathon running, you've got to look at the Comrades Marathon and you've got to say this is the ultra marathon of the world. And there's no question about it. I mean, there's no arguments about it. It is one of the most famous ultra marathons in the world. It's the most ultra marathon. It's amazing how things happen in life. I can remember living in the UK. I've been in the UK for probably 27 or so years. And when I was living back in South Africa, I was pretty well known because of my sport. People knew who I was and what I'd done. But coming out here, you just become anonymous. Nobody knows who the devil you are. And in some ways that's quite nice. But in other ways you think, well, I've done all this stuff, but nobody knows who the devil I am. And I had a colleague of mine who, funny enough, is a business associate of mine, is a cousin of someone who's run the Comrades in the United Kingdom. And I'll say his name, it was Steve Hollier. And I couldn't at that point remember him exactly because he wasn't a prominent athlete, but he certainly was a gold medalist. And when I was thinking, I thought, oh, Steve Hollier, that name is really familiar. And when I looked at the records, I remember him now finishing, if I'm correct, I think he finished 7th in the Comrades the 1 year. And he was a pretty useful athlete. And we got together and we met him 2 years ago in the London Marathon and had some really good reminiscence, chatting away and about who he knew and who I knew. He ran for Jones Carries, I think, which was the same club as Alan Robb and some of the greats, the Comrades' great runners. And we just, clicked it. We obviously both athletes, both Comrades runners, and we really had a really good time. And then my colleague, I'll say his name, Peter, I won't give you his surname because he's anonymous. We had his 60th birthday just recently, and we had to do it up in London, and he was there, and my wife, Lena, was there, and it was a fantastic evening. Reminiscing. Of course, these guys know nothing about road running, so he and I were kind of engrossed in our road running experiences. And it's something that will live with me. I'd just like to talk about a really good friend of mine, Paddy Lander, who he and I are a similar age. I think he's a couple of years younger than me. But I remember running my second Pine Town Marathon with Patrick, and we were together. We were in the top 10 running through, and it was a tough race, really up hills and down dales. And we were going through the Kloof Gorge, which is a really, really difficult climb. And I think the two of us, we were sort of 7th or 8th, somewhere in that vicinity. And we were running through the Kloof Gorge, and Paddy turned to me and I said, I can't believe we're in the top 10. He said, look, this is the Kloof Gorge. Nobody's ever passed us in the Kloof Gorge. We can't get past here. And we carried on, and Patrick just ran away from me. He just went off, and I think he finished 5th or 6th, and I was one position behind him. And he went on to become a pretty good athlete, and he finished in the 1980 Comrades. He finished, if I get this right, I think it was 11 hours, at least 6 hours and 11 minutes. So he finished, pretty well up the field. I think 21st or 22nd, somewhere thereabouts. And he's been a really good friend of mine, and we still communicate even today. And it's someone that I really respect. He's a decent man. He's just a good Comrades runner. My Comrades were the guys who I competed with. Probably the best memory I have of Comrades Marathon is the guys who ran with me, and we as a team won the Comrades Gungadin Shield 3 times in a row. And we also won the Arthur Newton, which was the second team, twice. So we've done really well. It was a really small club. We only had 100 members, maybe 120 members. But we were dedicated people, and we just loved running. And I'll show you a picture of the first Comrades we won. The first Gunga we won was this here. And if you look at it, you'll see Ross Wood, Derek Tivis, Graham Fraser and Mwa. That was the first year we won the Comrades Gunga Din Shield. And it was, it just lifted the club. It was such a small club. And people, you know.
And what is the Gunga Din Shield?
The Gunga Din Shield is the first four, aggregate of the first four finishes in the Comrades. So you add the times together, and the aggregate of those 4 times, the least, the lowest is the winner. And we did that a good few times. Then we went on further to 1981, I think, yes, when we again won the Comrades Marathon. We won the Gunga Din Shield. And I'll say, that's Ross Wood, that's again Terry Tivis, that's Manwa, and this is Graham Fraser.